one seems to be exhibiting a guilty conscience, going on the offensive to protect something that might be based, at least in part, on a lie. To fully tell this story, let's first go through the background to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Then we'll get into some of the details of the lawsuit, as well as this new evidence that's come out that probably destroys the chances of success of literally all of Billy Mitchell's defamation lawsuits that arise out of this issue. Okay. Let's get going. If you look up Billy Mitchell on the internet, you'll find that he is an American video game player and a restaurateur. But it seems like it's not really his restaurants that he's known for. He apparently rose to national prominence in the 1980s when Life magazine included him in a photo spread of game champions during the height of the golden age of arcade video games. Then, in 1999, he was recognized by Namco, the maker of Pac-Man, as the video game player of the century for allegedly achieving the first perfect score in a Pac-Man arcade game. But Pac-Man isn't where this dispute comes from. It's from the arcade version of Donkey Kong. Specifically, there are 3 scores Mitchell says he received, disputed by defendant Twin Galaxies, that, if real, would constitute world record scores. To make things a little bit easier to reference, the litigation gives these scores shorthand names. The first one, the King of Kong score, was a score of 1,047,200 points that he apparently achieved on December 28, 2004. The second one was from July 14, 2007, the Mortgage Broker score, in which he allegedly scored 1,052,200 points. Then there's the Boomer score, where he allegedly scored 1,062,800 points on July 31st, 2010. The notoriety Mitchell has received from these alleged high scores has been notable, even if you yourself may not have heard of him until recently. He's appeared in a number of documentaries on competitive gaming, including a film in which he more or less starred, titled The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters. So what exactly gave rise to this dispute concerning these high scores? And who exactly is Twin Galaxies? According to court filings, Twin Galaxies was founded by a man named Walter Day in 1982. In 2014, he sold it to a man named Jason Jace Hall. Prior to that, Day partnered with video game adjudicators like the International Video Game Hall of Fame and the Guinness World Records to put together video game competitions. Between 1982 and 2014, Twin Galaxies oversaw world records through on-site referees or by video footage that was submitted to them. As you can imagine, video footage does carry some amount of risk, seeing as it can be potentially manipulated. But Twin Galaxies allowed it starting in the 1990s so that more players could participate remotely from home. On top of their world record adjudications, Twin Galaxies also runs a website where they publish rules for competitive video games, player performances are measured, and where records can be publicly viewed and challenged. These records will recognize players for high score, fastest time, and other categories. Twin Galaxies records are apparently held in high enough esteem that the Guinness World Records routinely uses them for several Guinness World Records Gamers Edition books, among others. Now, on to the dispute function on Twin Galaxies' website, because this is really where we start narrowing our focus to the dispute at hand. Twin Galaxies provides a specific process for disputing a score that appears on a leaderboard. Specifically, once a dispute has been submitted to Twin Galaxies, it's placed into a public dispute voting forum where the gaming community publicly discusses, presents evidence supporting or refuting the claim, debates, and votes on the veracity of the claim. As you can imagine, that's kind of what happened here with Billy Mitchell's 3 disputed scores. Particularly, it was Jeremy Young, who's registered through Twin Galaxies websites under the account name Zelnia, who submitted a dispute to these scores, claiming that they were not achieved through original Donkey Kong arcade hardware, as was required under the Twin Galaxies rules. Now, this may be obvious to you, but it's worth spelling out why this is important. You see, where people are competing against one another, it's important to ensure no one is giving themselves an unfair advantage, particularly where these attempts are being made outside the physical presence of Twin Galaxies officials. And so one of the main ways to do this is to ensure that everyone is making these attempts at these high scores or fastest records on original video game hardware. Otherwise, an update to the hardware can, for example, potentially give the player greater gameplay maneuverability that people operating on original hardware may not have. So if we're going to rank players across the board in a one-to-one comparison, it makes sense that everyone would have to operate on original hardware, even if just to simplify matters. Anyway, so Jeremy Young, or Zelnia, offers up this claim that Mitchell obtained these world record top scores on Donkey Kong hardware that had been modified in a number of ways. And he elaborates all of the reasons why he thinks that this is true. For example, he presented evidence that the video footage that Mitchell submitted for these top scores had some anomalies in the gameplay that suggested that the scores were achieved on an emulation platform, such as the MAME or MAME system. If you're unfamiliar, an emulation platform is hardware or software that enables one computer system to behave like another computer system. This can allow, for example, an arcade or console-based game to be run on a desktop computer. So the screen might look like an arcade game, but the player might have additional ways of commanding various controls on the game. So according to court filings, Twin Galaxies made this dispute public, allowing people to see the report, and also made copies of the video footage available for public viewing and comment. And at the same time, Twin Galaxies conducted their own investigation into the dispute. Then on April 12, 2018, Twin Galaxies published a statement to its website and social media accounts, which started with the following. Based on the complete body of evidence presented in this official dispute thread, Twin Galaxies administrative staff has unanimously decided to remove all of Billy Mitchell's scores, as well as ban him from participating in our competitive leaderboards. Twin Galaxies has meticulously tested and investigated the dispute case assertions, as well as a number of relevant contingent factors, such as the veracity of the actual video performances that the dispute claim assertions rely on. In addition to Twin Galaxies' own investigation into the dispute case assertions, at least 2 different third parties conducted their own explorations and came to identical conclusions. Most notable was the third party Carlos Pinheiro that Billy Mitchell engaged to help examine the dispute case claims on his behalf, utilizing whatever original equipment Billy could provide, whose final finding was consistent with Twin Galaxies' investigation and others. Dude, first impression looking at this, if the guy that Billy Mitchell himself tapped to do an objective investigation came to the same conclusions that Twin Galaxies did, I think Billy Mitchell's got some serious problems here. Anyway, I've been picking through the statement so far, but skipping just a little bit further. It says, from a Twin Galaxies viewpoint, the only important thing to know is whether or not the score performances are from an unmodified original DK Arcade PCB as per the competitive rules. As an aside, PCB stands for printed circuit board and is an indication in this context that someone is playing on original hardware. We now believe that they are not from an original unmodified DK Arcade PCB, and so our investigation of the tape content ends with that conclusion and assertion. With this ruling, Twin Galaxies can no longer recognize Billy Mitchell as the first million-point Donkey Kong record holder. I'm not gonna lie to you, if this is where the defamatory statements come from, Mitchell already has a very steep mountain to climb to win this defamation case, even without the bombshell evidence that came out. And to explain why I think that, let's talk about the law that's involved here. So on April 11th, 2019, Billy Mitchell filed a complaint in California State Court against Twin Galaxies. Oddly enough, he didn't include Jeremy Young, aka Zelnia, in this claim, even though he was the initial accuser in this cheating scandal. I'm not saying that he should be named as a defendant, I'm just saying that's a little bit interesting. Now, the complaint filed in April 2019 was later amended on March 12, 2020 in the first amended complaint after Mitchell hired an attorney to represent him in the case. And as of the first amended complaint, Mitchell asserts 2 claims: defamation and false light. Regular viewers of this channel can probably rattle off the elements of defamation by now, but just in case, here's a quick refresher. To show defamation, Mitchell needs to prove basically 4 elements. First, he has to show that Twin Galaxies lied about Mitchell. Second, he has to show that Twin Galaxies communicated that lie to at least one third party. Third, he has to show that Twin Galaxies did so with the requisite intent. And fourth, he has to show that as a result, he suffered reputational harm. Now, although Billy Mitchell isn't exactly a household name like Lance Armstrong, to the third parties at whom the Twin Galaxies statement was aimed, he was very well known. So for the purposes of the statements at issue and in the context of this community, he would be considered a public figure. And that means that in this case, the requisite intent is actual malice. To show actual malice, Mitchell needs to show that not only did Twin Galaxies lie about him, but they did so knowing that what they were saying was false or acting with reckless disregard to the truth or falsity of the statement. I cannot express how hard this standard typically is to overcome, and for good reason. The United States Supreme Court has long held that when we're talking about public figures, the public needs the ability to comment on them. It's protected by the First Amendment, so just getting something wrong about a public figure isn't enough for defamation, or else defamation actions by public figures would chill speech across the board. So because the First Amendment does protect quite a bit of our speech about these kinds of topics, we need the ability to talk about public figures and make mistakes even when we are talking about them and not worry about a defamation case. Anyway, so that's the defamation elements. Looking at this particular case, I don't think that he has a strong case to begin with. Particularly, the First Amendment complaint points to the April 12th statement and alleges that Twin Galaxies called Mitchell a cheater who had established his records under false pretenses, or at least implied as much, so that any reasonable reader would understand that Twin Galaxies had called Mitchell a cheater who deserved punishment by stripping him of all his Twin Galaxy records and banning him for life from submitting further records. For starters, the claim that he did cheat for these records started with a report that was submitted by a member of the public. It then followed a process that is laid out on their website as a general practice. They then had public comment on it, and Twin Galaxies said that they had third parties investigate the matter further before making their own conclusion. It really is hard to see recklessness as to the truth, let alone knowledge of falsity. But in the First Amendment complaint, Mitchell argues that the records were established on arcade software witnessed by hundreds of people who have submitted sworn affidavits that they witnessed Mitchell achieve these scores on arcade software. He basically points to a number of things that Jace Hall, the owner of Twin Galaxies, did throughout the investigation to say that Hall ran a biased and negatively natured investigation over the issue that was steered to ultimately invalidate Mitchell's scores. For example, Mitchell claims that Hall refused to regard Mitchell's witness testimony supporting his scores, saying that Twin Galaxies would only consider, quote, scientific evidence. Mitchell also claims that Hall disregarded a statement by Nintendo's senior engineer, Wayne Shirk, who said the board used in the mortgage broker score was a certified original Nintendo arcade hardware. Finally, Mitchell also claims that Hall chose a biased third-party investigator to shepherd the investigation. But the thing about the actual malice standard is that really all the defendant needs to do here is to point to a reasonable explanation supporting the statement they made about the plaintiff and any kind of reasonable rebuttal to all of these things that Mitchell just pointed to. At the same time, most or even all of these things can be true. And even if there's one strong enough piece of evidence supporting the idea that Mitchell didn't play on original hardware, that's enough for Twin Galaxies to prevent Mitchell from being able to meet the actual malice standard. So that's defamation. What about false light? Well, false light is actually very similar to defamation, and you can kind of think of it as like defamation light. Basically, false light is where the defendant makes a statement to the public that is untrue and is highly offensive to a reasonable person. And as with defamation, for public figures, the statement has to be made with actual malice in order for the plaintiff to win. So although for false light, the statement doesn't necessarily need to be defamatory, it does need to be false and it needs to be highly offensive. Let's go through a couple examples to show what might or might not be considered false light. One example is the case Selleck v. Globe International, Inc. There, Robert Selleck, the father of Tom Selleck, sued Globe International, Inc. for libel and invasion of privacy by depicting Robert in a false light when the tabloid magazine purported to quote Robert as saying his celebrity son was, quote, ill at ease with women and, quote, not the person that women think he should be. Robert denied making those statements, and the court ultimately found these allegations constituted a false light invasion of privacy because they implied Robert had been paid to violate his celebrity son's confidence, quote, imputing to plaintiff a Judas-like betrayal of his son. But consider another case where an Iraq War veteran sued for false light publicity over his depiction in the movie The Hurt Locker, where they portrayed him as the main character, Will James, as a bad father, lacking compassion, fascinated with war and death, and disobedient. This was the case Sarver v. Chartier, where the Ninth Circuit said that even if the film's portrayal of the plaintiff was false, it was not highly offensive to a reasonable person. Particularly, a reasonable viewer of the film would see the plaintiff's character as, quote, a heroic figure, albeit one struggling with certain internal conflicts, who showed compassion for Iraqi citizens. So one thing to remember here is that for both defamation and false light claims, truth of the statement is a perfect defense. In other words, if it comes out that it's actually true, there is absolutely zero case. It's dead in the water completely. In other words, in Billy Mitchell's case, even if Mitchell is right in that Hall was steering the investigation towards invalidating Mitchell's scores, if there is some relatively damning evidence out there that shows that Twin Galaxies' statement is true, that's a perfect defense for Twin Galaxies. So turning to the statement itself, is there any evidence out there that convincingly supports the assertion that Billy Mitchell achieved these 3 disputed scores using non-original gaming hardware? In other words, is there any evidence out there that the hardware had any single modification on it? Well, new evidence was just leaked from this case that shows a clear indication that the answer seems to be yes. And really, that's all Twin Galaxies needs. Good, strong evidence of a single modification of the gaming hardware on one occasion of Mitchell's high scores is enough. With that, we can potentially ignore all of the witness testimony, all of the scientific reports by experts, all of that other stuff. Okay, so what exactly is this evidence that I'm talking about? It's a number of photos that were just made public, which I saw for the first time in Carl Jobst's latest video on the subject. And I have to admit, because I'm something of a noob on this subject myself, at first I didn't really know what it was that I was really looking at. But here's a clip from Carl's video explaining the evidence that's just recently come to light. Again, for the full video, please click on the link in the description below.
I have to admit, everything here looks pretty legit, and oh my god, what is that? That joystick is not an original Donkey Kong joystick. This arcade machine does not have original, unmodified Donkey Kong arcade hardware. This is an original Donkey Kong stick. It's got a big black ball and a short column. The stick on Billy's arcade is a tall stick with a smaller ball, and it's obviously red, so the stick has been changed to something else. On top of that, it appears to be an 8-way stick. Now, the original Donkey Kong stick is 4-way, which means it can only go up, down, left, and right. But an 8-way stick, like the one you would find on all modern arcades, can also go diagonally. When it comes to Donkey Kong, an 8-way stick fundamentally changes the way the game can be played. If you want to steer barrels while on a ladder, you have to stop and hold left or right, because you can't go up and to the side at the same time. But with an 8-way stick, you can continue to climb ladders while steering barrels by using the diagonals. With an 8-way stick, you can do things you can't do on an original arcade, which is why they are banned. So not only is the stick not original, which was totally banned, it looks like an 8-way stick, which is extra banned.
It cannot be understated just how devastating this evidence is for Billy Mitchell's case. Not only has the hardware been modified, but it appears that it's been modified in such a way that clearly gives the player a boost in playing ability. This would be considered a material modification. This is apparently against the rules set forth by Twin Galaxies and is enough to get someone not only wiped from their record books, but permabanned for cheating. It would likely take an expert witness to explain all of this to a jury, but it doesn't take much explaining to show why this is materially significant. And here's why this is a really big legal mistake by Billy Mitchell. If you're going to go on the offensive in any kind of a defamation case, hello. Hi. Hi. Okay. If you're going to go on the offensive in a defamation case, you should always do your due diligence first. I mean, really, this is true for any litigation, but especially a case like this. Before you ever file, do your due diligence and ensure that there isn't some evidence out there that is going to clearly undermine your case. Oh, goodbye. Now, I suspect that Mitchell would argue something to the effect that these photos are not real. But given that these photos were taken at the mortgage brokers event in 2007, I would venture that these were likely taken digitally, in which case there's a really good chance that their veracity can be supported with metadata. So if the metadata checks out, it means that one and maybe even two of these scores can be invalidated with this photo alone. And because Twin Galaxies has a zero tolerance policy on honesty, really, they only need to show that he cheated on one occasion to substantiate permabanning him. And here's why this impacts not just this case, but every defamation case that Billy Mitchell has filed, including one he's filed against Carl Jobst, by the way. You see, all of the litigation that I've seen or heard of filed by Billy Mitchell stems from someone making a statement or portraying him as a cheater. But now, if this court makes a final finding that Twin Galaxies' statements are not defamatory, especially because they're actually true, that's something that could be essentially copy-pasted into any and all litigation filed by Billy Mitchell on similar defamation claims. And that's because of something called collateral estoppel or issue preclusion. Under California law, as is the case in many jurisdictions, where a particular issue has already been litigated fully and finally, it cannot be brought again. That is, the defendant in a later lawsuit can bring up that full and final decision as a defense so that they don't have to bear the costs of fully relitigating the whole issue from the start. This includes later litigation where the defendant is the same defendant as the first lawsuit, or where the defendant is different but stands in privity with the first defendant. In other words, where their interests are essentially the same as the first defendant and where their interests were fully represented by the last defendant's litigation efforts. Now, there are limitations on issue preclusion. One of them is that it has to be an exact one-to-one matchup. Another limitation is sometimes courts will not allow a party to use a prior decision if it comes from a completely different jurisdiction. An example of both of these can be found in Amber Heard's failed attempt to use the final decision in Johnny Depp's UK defamation case against the publisher of The Sun to prevent his claims from moving forward in Fairfax, Virginia. Technically, she tried to use claim preclusion, not issue preclusion. It's a very, very similar concept, though. But even if issue preclusion is not an available defense for these other defendants, they can still use the photos themselves as evidence to argue that their statements portraying Billy Mitchell as a cheater are actually true. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Does the initial case have enough here for Billy Mitchell to show actual malice, maybe? What about the photos? Are they as damning to you as they seem to me? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found this interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could Earlier this week, the Santa Fe County District Attorney's Office dropped. There's something else that struck me while watching Logan Paul's response video to CoffeeZilla's series about him. You see, he throws out a number of allegations about a number of people that, just for Logan's sake, I really hope is true. Because it would be terribly ironic if in a video where he's throwing around the word defamation about CoffeeZilla, if in fact in that very video he is actually defaming a number of people.
According to Logan's piece, this is crime details from the year 2002. So again, I couldn't find anything under this name, under that specific district court, so it really made me wonder, is this actually public information? Now I decided to get both sides of the story and ask Zach Kelling myself, and according to Zach Kelling, the record is in fact expunged, according to what he has told me.
Oh, this is so much worse. So I recently published a video talking about the legal mistakes that Logan Paul may have made in his response videos to CoffeeZilla's 3-part series on him and CryptoZoo and the possibility of them being an alleged scam. And in response to that, I got a number of questions from people asking for more information or more analysis on Developer Z, who Logan Paul outed as Zach Kelling. First, if you haven't seen that first video, it's linked in the description below. You might want to watch that first. But otherwise, let's continue on. So specifically, a lot of people pointed to a particular video that was put on the channel Some Ordinary Gamers, run by a guy by the name of Mudahar. In reviewing this whole mess, Mudahar actually reached out to and got in contact with Zach Kelling. And upon further research, I found that Zach has actually also posted some things onto Facebook in his own defense. So in this video, we're going to take and analyze this new information and see how it changes this whole situation. And boy, does it change things. Specifically, in my opinion, it makes things worse for Logan Paul. We'll show some pieces from Mudahar's video, also linked in the description below, but first let's take a look at this Facebook post by Zach Kelling. So this is a post by Zach Kelling on Facebook on January 5th, 2023. Update: Logan has finally removed the defamatory video. Thank you for all the support. And then it goes to what looks like the original post, which says, "Dear friends and colleagues, as some of you may have seen, I have been personally attacked by blogger Logan Paul on his YouTube channel. As I care deeply about the well-being, reputations, and continued success of all my colleagues, partners, investors, and our associated work, I am writing to address the core of his claims here. Firstly, I made mistakes 20 years ago, which I deeply regret, and yes, these gave me a criminal record. I have since been granted wanted an expungement and have worked very hard to move forward with my life and career. I believe that everyone has the right to lead a dignified life, and I have worked very hard to build a decent life for myself, my family, and everyone around me. I speak openly with friends, colleagues, and investors about my history who have and continue to express support for me and my work. I am writing a book this year about my entrepreneurial journey and how I was able to overcome adversity and build meaningful multi-billion-dollar businesses and hundreds of open source projects and help millions of developers in my professional career. Secondly, I am an investor in an original CTO of CryptoZoo. The devs are still owed over $1 million USD by CryptoZoo and 5% tokens. I am happy to share the GitHub, which shows it was indeed a heroic effort by over 30 folks. In fact, Logan used my good name and reputation in the crypto community to raise money for this project. I worked really hard on CryptoZoo and we all wished for it to be successful. We quit the project because Logan didn't pay us for our services rendered. In closing, I would like to sincerely thank everyone for the outpouring of support that I have received in the past few days in light of these attacks. My legal counsel will be following up with Logan and the CryptoZoo team to address their claims directly. All my best, Zach. Oh, Logan, what did you do? So, according to Zach, there were some significant problems with some of the things that Logan was saying in his response video to CoffeeZilla. So let's go through 3 of the main claims that Logan made here. First was that Logan claimed that Zach had stolen the code or held it hostage.
Coffee, you interviewed the developer who stole the game code, fled to Switzerland, and held it hostage for $1 million.
Second was Logan claimed that the 30 developers that Zach claimed that he was working with or that he had hired for the project were actually only 3.
I guess among many things, it doesn't surprise me that he lied about having 30 engineers and a $50,000 a week burn rate.
On my end, I have 30 engineers. I'm burning $50,000 a week.
Which, side note, is how this delusionist landed on the $1 million code ransom, but it turns out he only had 3 engineers.
And finally, Logan claimed that Zach Kelling supposedly had been convicted of a felony, specifically armed robbery of a liquor store.
Surely, as the internet detective that you proclaim to be, you would know that he spent time in prison for multiple felonies, one for aggravated robbery, armed robbery at a liquor store, and the other for, surprise, obstructing the legal process. I can see why you kept him anonymous. Wouldn't someone with journalistic integrity know their credible source had not only an agenda, but a fondness for orange jumpsuits? Or did you just hear what you wanted to hear and move on?
So let's start with the first one, the claim that he had stolen the code or held it hostage overseas. Now, in CoffeeZilla's original series, Zach was on audio saying that he had not been paid previously, which was why he took the code with him.
Now, obviously, the first thing I wanted to do was hunt down this developer, who we'll be calling Z here, and find out the truth of what happened. Why did he steal Logan's code for $1 million? However, I finally got a hold of him, and when I did, he admitted he took the code hostage, but he says the reason for it was nothing like what Logan had said.
He never paid me anything at all, ever. I never paid. And, we got to a point when I was working on it where I just realized they were just going to try to steal all of my work and not pay me. And so I took all the source code private. And I just kind of, we spent a month just trying to negotiate and get something figured out where I would finally get paid. Because, I'm, on my end, I have a team of 30 engineers. I'm earning $50,000 a week on building this thing. And the only thing they brought to the table were a bunch of Photoshop JPEGs.
Now, it seems like one of the first issues here that happened was that there was no written agreement between the parties, between Zach Kelling and Logan Paul and the rest of the team for CryptoZoo.
Now, in all seriousness, I do want to acknowledge something which actually kind of looks bad a bit on the developers, because it turns out very few written contracts were actually done. So much of this were verbal deals like, oh, we'll take care of you. We'll give you $350K. We'll give you $1 million. We'll give you whatever. But then when it was time to actually sign the deals, there's just always delays.
What kind of promises were made to you? Verbal promises, basically. So verbal promises, and then we follow up with a physical paper agreement. But that's when communication broke down.
So it sounds like they didn't have anything reduced down to writing about the scope of work, the payment for services, or who owns the IP and at what various stages people own the IP. Side note, we don't give legal advice on this channel, but for anyone that needs to hear it, this is just general life advice. If you are going to go to work on anything for anyone else, or if you are going to hire someone to work for you for anything for you at all, please go and get it down in writing in some form or another, ideally in some kind of a contract that both have actually signed physically. And do this before anyone starts any kind of work on the project. It makes everything in the project flow so much smoother when everyone can have a clear understanding of what their expectations can be in that project. And it can avoid a lot of these kinds of issues like what we're seeing in this case. But I will say that even in this case where there apparently wasn't anything reduced down to writing for the scope of work and the payment of services, that a good argument could probably be made that there was a common understanding of some sort of an agreement along a lot of those terms. The evidence that would support that kind of an argument would be the communications between the two parties talking about the scope of work, and then the actual actions by both parties that the other parties know that they are taking that are both in reliance on and in conformity with that common sort of understanding with those communications. But still, it's a harder argument to make than if you have something actually down in writing. And so if the court could find that there is some form of an enforceable agreement between the two parties, where there is a dispute between the two parties, where both sides say that the other side did something wrong, the court is going to try to analyze who breached the contract. And typically what we would look to is who acted outside of the terms of the agreement first. Here, Zach says that he took the code because Logan didn't pay him and refused to pay him.
He literally never paid me anything at all, ever. I never paid.
This is something that Logan has not disputed as far as I can see. And so if that is true, that would mean that Logan was the one who actually breached the agreement because of the fact that he was the one that was responsible for paying. That was his end of the bargain, was to pay for the services. So if he didn't pay for the services and then he refused to pay for them, that means that he's the one that's actually breached the contract first. So is it defamatory for Logan to say that Zach held the code hostage? To be honest with you, I wouldn't actually call that defamation because of the fact that in order for a statement to be defamatory, it has to be a statement of fact. And this to me sounds like it's more of a statement of an opinion. It's a way that he has characterized the situation. I completely disagree with that characterization personally based on the information that I've heard. Zach did agree that he took the code, but the characterization of the circumstances under which he took it are not exactly the way that Logan was describing them to be. But I still think that that would be likely considered a statement of opinion more so than a statement of fact. But I will say that that is enough of a gray area that I think a jury could potentially come to a different conclusion. So if you found yourself on the jury, what do you think? Do you think that that is defamatory? Do you think that's more of a statement of fact or statement of opinion? Let us know in the comments down below. So let's turn to that second statement, the statement that Zach didn't actually hire 30 developers, but he only hired 3. Zach reaffirmed in that Facebook post that he hired 30 developers, and he said that he is happy to share the information from GitHub. Zach then further maintained the same thing when he spoke with Mudahar over at Some Ordinary Gamers.
Now, I decided to get both sides of the story and ask Zach Kelling myself, who I found through his own website over here and his own GitHub projects. So you can actually see that he's a pretty, active programmer. Of course, Zach even went down into the Facebook post that Logan had showed in his video, and had shown that Logan had apparently cherry-picked it because there was moments where he was contacting with an entire team, as you can see on Discord over here. So there were about 20 different other 30-something odd devs working on CryptoZoo at the time. Of course, this is just Zach's own statements as well, too. But of course, I wanted to provide both sides and look into exactly what was happening.
So if things are the way that Zach says that they are, it looks like Logan not only lied about this, but did so in a way that was particularly sneaky. And in my opinion, quite possibly with actual malice. As a reminder, in the last video, I said that in my opinion, Zach would probably be treated less like a public figure and more like a private person for purposes of defamation. And because of that, I said that Zach would probably only need to show that Logan was being negligent in the way that he was lying about him in order to show defamation. But let's take it a step further and assume that Zach is in fact a public figure for the purposes of this whole situation. Can Zach show that Logan lied about him with actual malice? Remember first that actual malice is where the defendant has lied about the plaintiff knowing that what they said was false or with reckless disregard as to the truth or falsity of the statement. This is a significant jump up from negligence. and it's very difficult for a lot of people to meet. But here we have evidence that Logan potentially ignored some social media posts about Zach talking to these over 30 people and instead cherry-picked a couple other posts that show photos of 3 individuals or have 3 individuals tagged. To me personally, yeah, that does look like cherry picking, and that does look like he would have had knowledge that what he was saying was not true, or at the very least enough in front of him to stop to ask a couple questions about whether or not what he was looking at was confirming what he was saying, or whether or not the other information that was right in front of him actually was showing the truth. So for this point, yeah, it's definitely possible that Logan could be looking at a defamation claim. But then we get to arguably the most important part of Logan's video, and the most important part, I guess, particularly for Zach Kelling. And that is in reference to Logan's claim that Zach was this felon who had committed an armed robbery of a liquor store. Now, according to Zach, he says, yes, he did have a criminal history. But he says that he never robbed any liquor store. He was a teenager at the time. This was over 20 years ago. And most importantly, this has been expunged. This is super important for our purposes. So let's talk about expungement. Expungement is essentially the process of wiping clean someone's criminal history so that it's as if the criminal history doesn't really exist. Different states treat expungement differently. As an example, California doesn't even really fully have expungement. So it's important to look at the state where the criminal history was to see the process of expungement and what it really means here. In this case, it looks like Logan Paul flashed on the screen a criminal history that was based in the state of Kansas. So let's look at Kansas's law on expungements. So to begin, there are different pathways towards expungement depending on whether the conviction was a juvenile conviction or an adult conviction. In this case, we know that Zach was a teenager. We don't know if he was 18 or 19 or younger than 18. But it does sound like he was suggesting that he was a minor at the time, so let's go in that direction. So if he was a minor, this is the process of expungement for his particular record. So under Kansas law, juveniles with a criminal record can have both the arrest and the court records expunged. However, expungement is not available for certain serious or violent offenses. Here's how the process works for juveniles in Kansas. First, the person has to be at least either 23 years old or at least 2 years have passed since the final discharge. Once that time period has passed, the person can file a petition with the court where the court will have a hearing on it. At the hearing, the court checks for the following conditions. First, there can't have been any subsequent convictions or adjudication against the person. Second, it has to be the case that no other charges are pending against that person. And third, the petitioner's circumstances and behavior have to warrant expungement. Basically, all of this points to a circumstance where someone has done something wrong in the past, but has clearly learned from it and hasn't fallen into the same sort of pattern of behavior that makes it likely that they are going to return to prison. Now, regardless of whether we are talking about juvenile expungements or adult expungements, in Kansas, even with an expungement of a criminal record, the custodian of records has to disclose the existence of those records to various state agencies upon request. So there is some part of this world where those records still continue to exist, but for very limited purposes. Now, because of the sensitivity of these kinds of records, there are some very strict rules about sharing that information. It can't be shared except for in strict accordance with Kansas state law. And the state agency that is requesting the information can only request it if they have a legitimate need for the information. And what's more, the penalties for an improper sharing of expungement information like this can be pretty serious. According to Kansas law, any individual violating or causing a violation of that provision, in other words, improperly sharing the information, is guilty of a Class A non-person misdemeanor. Let me say that again. They are guilty of a Class A non-person misdemeanor for improperly sharing this information. So, okay, then the question comes down to Logan Paul's use of this expungement information. Is that a permissible use? My gut tells me no. But on this channel, we don't just go with our gut. We try to look to case law research, statutory research, whatever we can find to see if that can illuminate the path forward. And here's one case that I found from Kansas. It's a case from 1996 called Patrick v. City of Overland Park. In that case, a Kansas police chief got into some serious hot water for disclosing the expunged criminal record of a political opponent during a political campaign. This was, according to the court, a long-closed and highly sensitive, non-public file. Does that sound familiar? The plaintiff in that case alleged that the purpose of that search was to find damaging information to use against him in the political campaign. And according to the court opinion, the defendant did not claim a legitimate need to search the plaintiff's criminal history. So the court, on a question of whether to dismiss the case or not, decided to allow it to proceed further in the litigation. So in other words, the court agreed that using it for political oppo research is not a legitimate purpose for use of this particular information. Now, there are some important distinctions between that particular case and this case in front of us with Logan Paul and Zach Kelling. Most notably is the fact that this was a civil rights case against a government actor and a government entity acting on behalf of the government or under color of law. Logan Paul is obviously not a government official and not a government entity, so there are some differences between this case and that case. But the important part of that case to note for purposes of this case is the determination that use of an expunged criminal record for political oppo research is not a legitimate purpose. And that's especially where the information is from a long-closed and highly sensitive non-public file. And while Logan Paul is not running for any political office here, we can thank our lucky stars for that, it nonetheless can easily be argued that it's a very similar situation here, essentially because he's running sort of a public relations campaign with this video. The whole purpose of Logan Paul's initial reaction video and his statements on his Impulsive podcast afterwards was to convince the public at large that this person, Developer Z, also known as Zach Kelling, is not someone who is to be trusted. Now, I don't know how or from whom Logan got this information. It could have been someone in law enforcement, or it could have been an attorney with access to those kinds of tools and resources on something like a Westlaw account. If you're not familiar, Westlaw is a very commonly used legal research tool that is subscription-based that lawyers use for really some of the best legal research that you can get. And it has a lot of different tools that you can use to help in litigation, including getting background checks on all kinds of things. Now, if the person who gave Logan this information is an attorney, there is a decent possibility that they could be facing a license suspension or at the very least some sort of ethics violation ruling. But the question really is about Logan himself. Is he under any sort of potential liability under this kind of statute? Arguably, given the breadth of the language of this particular statute, I think Logan actually could face some legal issues here. Now, here's a final question on this issue. Is that defamation? Well, if we're going to say yes, first we have to spot the lie in the statement. Based on what Zach said, it is true that he had a criminal record, although it has been expunged at this point. But as far as I've seen, Zach has not admitted or denied anything about that criminal record being a felony. And importantly, we don't know what that conviction is actually for. Zach has flat out said that he never robbed a liquor store. So if we take what Zach is saying as true, then Logan lied about Zach being a felon for a conviction for armed robbery of a liquor store. And if that's true, let's take a look at the requisite intent that's needed for defamation. Like I did earlier in the video, let's see if this meets the actual malice standard. To answer that, let's turn first back to the criminal history sheet that Logan shared in his reaction video. He points out how one charge appears to show obstruction of legal process.
He spent time in prison for multiple felonies, one for aggravated robbery, armed robbery at a liquor store, and the other for, surprise, obstructing the legal process.
So we would expect this supposed other charge to also be on a sheet just like this one. Logan doesn't show it. And if Zach says that it didn't happen, and Logan is saying that he got that information about the first charge from this sheet, where did he get the information for the second one?
This one was invented by a writer. Pure fiction. We made it up.
Okay, but seriously, if Logan is pointing to this document and he just assumes that Zach robbed a liquor store, even if Logan was given that information by someone else and he just trusted it, it does seem pretty reckless not to ask where these background check records say that Zach was convicted of armed robbery of a liquor store, especially if he can see on this document that there is a charge on the document for the first one. So to me, this does look like he's being at least reckless about the truth or falsity of the statement that he's making, which would be actual malice. But that said, I am open to all facts here because I want to have this analysis be as objective as possible. So I would be curious to see if Logan Paul had any sort of defenses on that point that I simply don't know about at this point. But those are my thoughts. This is insanity and a complete legal dumpster fire, in my opinion. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. Special thanks to members of Bike Club who are supporting this channel, whether through YouTube memberships or supporters on Locals, supporters on Patreon. We often talk about subjects that YouTube does not like to monetize, so your support means so much to this channel. And to everybody else watching, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative, and if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more content like this and you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next video. After CoffeeZilla came out with a 3-part expose about Logan Paul on the subject of scamming his fans for the crypto project CryptoZoo, Logan Paul decided to respond with a couple videos of his own, in both of which he forcefully threatened to sue CoffeeZilla.
If not, we're going to handle this ourselves while we continue to build CryptoZoo, and I'll see you in court.
Part 6 is the more he says and the more he continues to spread this misinformation that this was any sort of con or scam, the more I have for the lawsuit that I am filing. The defamation lawsuit that is happening, because this is wrong. This is wrong.
In this video, we're talking about what's happened since, as well as a bunch of places where Logan may have made some major legal missteps. Let's get into it. So as a bit of background, if you don't know who Logan Paul is, he's a massive, huge YouTuber who's been around for a very long time and has had his fair share of controversies along the way, some of which were fairly large. Then on the other hand, we have CoffeeZilla, which is a YouTube channel run by a man named Steven. Steven, or CoffeeZilla, primarily makes content that is focused on exposing scammers and multi-level marketing schemes, things like that. And lately, CoffeeZilla has been absolutely on fire. He started by exposing Sam Bankman-Fried and his crypto exchange FTX, all the way until SBF got arrested in the Bahamas. He also made an incredible video exposing Andrew Tate's Hustlers Academy months before Tate ever got arrested in Romania for rape and human trafficking. So when a 3-part series about Logan Paul by CoffeeZilla appeared on YouTube at the end of last month, I can understand why Logan would freak out. You see, CoffeeZilla worked behind the scenes for about a year investigating Logan Paul's crypto NFT project, CryptoZoo. Here's Logan Paul explaining what CryptoZoo is.
CryptoZoo is a blockchain project that I created about a year and a half ago. Yeah, maybe I should give some context to what the game is. So you buy these eggs on the blockchain and you can hatch them into what are called base animals. I think there were like 14 or 15 of them. And then you can breed your base animals with each other to create fun looking viral hybrid offspring that have a rarity scale. If you hatch a rare animal and you breed it with another rare animal and it yields a rare hybrid animal, that animal then yields and collects a token the longer you hold it. Then when you release it into the wild, you accrue your yield. Does that make sense? That was the concept.
Got it.
Anyway, what came out of that investigation was this 3-part expose on CryptoZoo being basically a complete scam that had separated a lot of people from millions of their own hard-earned dollars.
Today, we're investigating Logan Paul's CryptoZoo, a blockchain game that made millions but never worked. Some of you guys think you know the story, but it goes so much deeper. I've uncovered sociopaths, billionaires, fake orphans, Did I mention fake orphans? And of course, at the center of it, we have Logan Paul himself, who has abandoned this thing, leaving thousands of fake orphans in his wake. Wait a second. Thousands of victims in his wake. Now, you'll be hearing from some of those people because their stories are heartbreaking.
Anyway, so following and in response to the 3-part series, Logan Paul came out with a video trying to discredit CoffeeZilla and essentially threaten him with defamation. He followed that up with another episode of his Impulsive podcast where he spent a great deal of time talking about the series and talking about CoffeeZilla and again reiterating his plans to sue CoffeeZilla. Hello, it's future Alita, or Alita of the present, Alita of the more recent past. Everything you've seen in this video so far has been past Alita. One of the things that's pretty unique to working in this space is the degree to which things can move very quickly, especially when you are covering controversies between two different major YouTube channels. Sometimes even if you jump right onto a trending topic right away, somewhere along the process of scripting, filming, and editing your video all the way up until the upload, things can change very quickly. And when that happens, sometimes you have to go back and sort of change the video a little bit so that it is still relevant to the viewers, hopefully still relevant to the viewers. Anyway, that's basically what happened with this video. I was just about ready to come out with a video about all of the legal reasons why Logan Paul's 2 video reactions were a terrible idea. They still were a bad idea, but the first part of the video really kind of focused on Logan Paul's threats of litigation against CoffeeZilla. And at this point in time, CoffeeZilla has since tweeted out that he received a phone call from Logan Paul saying that he was going to be taking down his 2 response videos and that he was not going to be moving forward with litigation. What's up? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Holmes, you want to hang out? No? Okay. Now, I will say this is the best possible decision that Logan could have made at this particular juncture. Oh, hello. What? Okay. Hi. Hey, buddy. You have something to say? Okay. Anyway, back to it. Where was I? I'm going to go back a little bit. I will say this is the best possible decision that Logan could have made at this particular juncture because even though he has to take a big public L by essentially losing a game of litigation chicken against CoffeeZilla, moving forward with a defamation case against CoffeeZilla would have been potentially disastrous for Logan Paul no matter what. Here's past Alita explaining why. If he does decide to move forward and pursue litigation, in my personal opinion, I don't think that he's likely to win a case of defamation against CoffeeZilla for this expose. And that's because in order to win a case of defamation, it's not just about the full story not being told. There are a number of elements that have to be met in order for the plaintiff to win. First, the plaintiff has to show that the defendant lied or made some sort of a misstatement about the plaintiff. Second, the plaintiff has to show that that statement was made to at least one third party. Third, the plaintiff has to make a showing of the requisite intent. I'll get to that in just a second. And fourth, the plaintiff has to show that there's some sort of reputational harm that was done to the plaintiff as a result of the lie or the misstatement. Now, there are certain cases where the plaintiff doesn't actually have to show this last element, the reputational harm element. That is defamation per se. This is where somebody has lied about somebody being a criminal, having an STD, or sometimes about somebody's work or their profession. But going back to that third element, the requisite intent, it depends on who it is that the plaintiff is. Where that plaintiff is a private person versus a public figure, then the plaintiff only needs to show that the defendant lied or made the misstatement about them with negligence. That's a fairly low standard and fairly easy to meet. But where we're talking about the plaintiff being a public figure, Logan Paul very easily a public figure here, then he has to show actual malice. Meaning, Logan Paul would have to show that not only did CoffeeZilla lie or make some misstatements about him, but that he did so either knowing that what he was saying was false or with reckless disregard as to the truth or falsity of the statement. Now, there are a number of issues with Logan Paul claiming that the video series was somehow defamatory. Number one, his video doesn't actually point out any specific statements that he says are untrue, other than to say that there is more information that CoffeeZilla didn't actually include in his videos. That's not the same thing as saying that something that CoffeeZilla actually said was actually a false statement. He has to pull out a specific statement to say this was false. The only thing that we can really point to here that he would be saying is false is that Logan Paul is a scammer. So I guess we can just go with that and then continue on with our analysis. But this actual malice standard is something that is going to be a very, very, very high hurdle for Logan Paul to meet. And that's because part of the beauty of CoffeeZilla's series is he shows his work along the entire way. He talks about the different weaknesses and potential arguments and how he really looks at things from multiple perspectives.
Now, I didn't want to just take one person's word for it, so I later confirmed with another developer who worked for something called the Blockchain Center that he also hadn't been paid.
We've been paid nothing. I would have loved to have Zoo, but I don't have any.
He talks to a number of individuals, including another journalist who has previously investigated Eddie Ibanez, one of the other members of the Crypto Zoo team.
I wasn't quite sure what to make of him. Based on what I knew about him, he was a MIT grad who went on to work for the CIA and the Defense Department, and I didn't want to waste his time. And it wasn't long after I sat down that I realized he was wasting my time.
Can you tell me about some of the lies Eddie told?
Eddie has told me so many lies over the course of my 2 interviews with him. And the first lie he told me is probably the oldest lie that he's told so many people, which is that he's an orphan.
So by showing his work along the way, CoffeeZilla really has immunized himself quite a bit from any potential defamation liability here, especially because we're talking about actual malice. It's really hard to look at everything that he did in all of these videos and to say that he was being reckless about the truth or falsity here. It looks actually like he was being quite careful in pulling on all kinds of different threads and looking at things from multiple perspectives. So in my personal opinion, I think that it would be a fool's errand for Logan Paul to go down this route to sue CoffeeZilla for defamation, because I really don't think that that's a case that he would really be likely to win anyway. But even before we get to the point of proving or disproving the defamation, CoffeeZilla really actually has a couple options here if faced with a complaint. And those options are between filing an anti-SLAPP motion or allowing the litigation to proceed. So first, let's talk about anti-SLAPP. So anti-SLAPP comes from SLAPP, which means strategic litigation against public participation. It's basically a mechanism for removing very quickly litigation that is aimed towards trying to diminish someone's First Amendment rights. In other words, where the lawsuit is basically aimed at trying to prevent someone from doing something that they have a constitutional right to do so. Like, for example, speak freely. Anti-SLAPP motions are filed really early in the litigation, especially in states like Texas and California, where they are very powerful and have a very specific mechanism for freezing the litigation, getting everything kicked out, and ultimately punishing the plaintiff for bringing it in the first place. In an anti-SLAPP inquiry, basically, usually there's a 2-step process. First, the court asks whether the conduct that gave rise to the lawsuit is protected by the First Amendment. Examples of conduct that falls under this umbrella would be filing litigation, speaking in a congressional hearing, or speaking on a topic of public interest. In this particular case, CoffeeZilla was talking about influencers potentially scamming their own viewers or their own fans for the purposes of making money off of them. That is arguably a topic of public interest. So if hypothetically we have a defamation lawsuit here and CoffeeZilla decides to file an anti-SLAPP motion, that first prong would be met. But that's not the end of the analysis here. See, then the court would be asking whether or not the plaintiff has a likelihood of success on the merits of their case. And as I already discussed, in my personal opinion, I don't think that if Logan Paul brought a defamation case against CoffeeZilla, he would be likely to win. So this would be a case where CoffeeZilla arguably could have a very successful anti-SLAPP motion, anti-SLAPP process that got rid of this case very, very swiftly with zero expense to him. But like I said, that is one option that CoffeeZilla has if he is served with a complaint for defamation by Logan Paul. You see, CoffeeZilla could actually decide to allow the litigation to move forward. There's nothing compelling him to file an anti-slap motion here. Now, you might be thinking, why in the world would he do that? Who wants to have litigation proceed forward when it's expensive, it's scary, it's intimidating, you'll have to deal with lawyers all the time, it's a huge mess. Well, you have to remember that we are talking about CoffeeZilla here, who spent a year talking to individuals and investigating Logan Paul and CryptoZoo and all of the individuals that were involved in it, talking to people behind the scenes and trying to investigate in various ways and examining the blockchain. He really spent a lot of time and effort really trying to dig into it from an outsider's perspective. But if Logan Paul sues CoffeeZilla for defamation on this particular issue, and CoffeeZilla decides to allow it to proceed, it goes to discovery next. Meaning, Logan Paul opens himself up to having to give over all kinds of evidence that is relevant to this particular lawsuit. And when it comes to deciding what kind of information is discoverable or not discoverable, it's not just the information that would tend to prove or disprove the elements of defamation. It's also the evidence that would tend to prove or disprove the defenses that are made by the defendant. And the thing about defamation is that truth of the statement is always an absolute defense to the litigation. So in other words, if CoffeeZilla decided to allow it to proceed to discovery, he would have access to any information related to whether or not CryptoZoo is a scam. All of that would be discoverable, and Logan Paul would be required under rules of civil litigation to hand that over to CoffeeZilla. And any attempt to say that that's private information is not really likely to hold up, because at the end of the day, Logan Paul is the one that brought the litigation in the first place. So he is the one that has opened up the door to all of that information coming out to the other side in the first place. Now, the court may decide to put certain rules on whether or not that information may be disclosed to the public, but by and large, I would expect CoffeeZilla to be able to use a lot of that information for content. So either way, Logan Paul, in my opinion, loses the moment he files a complaint against CoffeeZilla. Okay, so you might be thinking, okay, so that's basically the end of it, right? Logan has decided that he's not moving forward with the litigation. He's taking down the 2 reaction videos. That's it, right? Well, not so fast. See, there are a number of reasons why those videos were arguably a terrible idea, legally speaking, that doesn't necessarily just go away just because he took those down. Here's Pastelita again explaining why Logan might have some legal issues from those videos. Number one, he says that he learned through CoffeeZilla's series that the people that he had hired were scammers and felons.
I don't know what to believe from his stuff, and I don't know what not to believe. I found out stuff. I found out things watching his series. Like, dude, I was at the airport when I watched the part where he said Jake's had stolen.
Of course.
I
was like, what?
$6 million. I don't know if that's true or not, but I knew he was a bad actor, hence why we kicked him off the team immediately when we found out he was only in it for the money.
Prerogatives, yeah. Things fell apart.
Not only is this a bad look in terms of the court of public opinion, and it makes him look incredibly incompetent as a leader, it also could be enough for investors to really sniff around and possibly pin him for defrauding them. Basically, in the video, he admits that a number of people that were working for him essentially scammed and defrauded all of these people, took off with their money, etc., etc.
Crypto King Jake stole $6 million. True or not, we had already removed him from the team when we realized he was a bad actor and his motives were purely financial. Conman Eddie, lead developer, stole $1.7 million. True or not, when we learned he was a bad actor as well, he was immediately removed from the team.
He says, effectively, these guys scammed people. It wasn't me. They just happened to work for me, and I made the mistake of relying on them.
I guess that's what I get for trusting the team that I relied on to vet and manage Eddie's hiring process, who has turned out to be a professional con man that I have since learned fooled billionaires, the Mormon Church, the owner of the New York Yankees, and now me.
So it's clear that he's trying to just pass off the blame to these other individuals and to say that he also is a victim, and maybe even more of a victim than some of these other victims, because he tries to dig up some crap about one of the victims that shows up in the video. But anyway, those statements don't really help him, because he basically is admitting in this video that these people have scammed these other people. he just says that it's not his fault. But him disclaiming fault here doesn't get him out of liability, potentially from these investors. There's a number of issues here that still lead the responsibility back to Logan. You see, he says that these people were hired by other people. Okay, let's go through the list. The first is the lead developer, who CoffeeZilla refers to as Z, who was apparently hired by Eddie Ibanez. Eddie Ibanez, in turn, I guess, turned out to be a scam artist who said he went to MIT, didn't really go to MIT, said he was an orphan, wasn't really an orphan, and then subsequently absconded with perhaps $1.7 million. So apparently the scam artist is the one who hired the felon to do the main developing on the app, or not the app, the project. And then he just stops the analysis there, as if that completely cuts off the responsibility to him. But at the end of the day, if Eddie Ibanez was the one who was deputized to hire the lead developer, Eddie Ibanez was also hired by someone. Logan doesn't say who hired Eddie Ibanez, but he does seem to suggest that it wasn't him. But the fact that he doesn't say who hired Eddie indicates that it was someone else close to him, and probably someone that he doesn't want to throw under the bus. To me, the only other person who probably would have hired Eddie would have been Logan's manager, Jeff Levin. And judging by the fact that Jeff made an appearance on Logan Paul's most recent podcast, Impulsive, something tells me that the two of them are still quite close. So this tells me that despite the fact that Logan is apparently upset about the fact that Eddie Ibanez turned out to be a scam artist, he's not that upset at whoever it was that hired him, whether it was him or it was Jeff, because both of them are still around, and Logan's just angry at CoffeeZilla, apparently.
It's like a little gnat. It's like a little fucking annoying gnat. It bothers me. He won. He's the most formidable opponent I've had. I'm not kidding, guys.
But even if Jeff was the one to hire him, at the end of the day, who is Jeff hired by? Logan. And the crux of the matter for this particular issue is the fact that there is something called a cause of action for negligent hiring, where an employer is legally responsible for an employee who harms a third party. This is where an employer knew or should have known about a risk presented by hiring the employee. This is why employers will very often run background checks on new hires. If it turns out that a new hire has something in their background that is particularly risky to either their other coworkers or to their clients or to anybody else to whom they might have contact in their professional work, that's something that could actually be brought all the way up to the employer. And so at the end of the day, if Logan is blaming either the lead developer or Eddie Ibanez for anything having to do with the failure of CryptoZoo, at the end of the day, that's still going to get back to Logan, because he should have done what was necessary in order to fulfill a background check on all of these individuals. And it's not like he didn't have access to this particular information. After all, according to CoffeeZilla's video, there was another journalist who was investigating Eddie Ibanez particularly, who actually found the lies that Eddie Ibanez had told about his background and about his resume, and brought all that information to Jeff before the CryptoZoo NFTs went live.
I found out CryptoZoo did have an advantage that could have saved them all this trouble the whole time.
So a month before the launch of CryptoZoo, I got on the phone with Jeff Levin, Logan Paul's manager. And after he spoke fondly of Eddie and his work, I confronted him about some of Eddie's lies, including how he didn't work for the NFL. Jeff told me he doesn't know much about the NFL, but he knows about the business world. And Chris Birch and Todd Morley vouched for Eddie. And so Jeff and Logan were going to continue working with him.
Have you ever verified that anything Eddie said about himself is true?
We verified that it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. We definitely talked to people.
Okay.
And his friends and, people that he said he has relationships with, which we've confirmed them for sure.
Okay. Because I had trouble with some of that, like, with the NFL, like, saying that, like, no, we've never worked with him. And that kind of thing. But you've had...
The NFL saying that?
Yeah.
Like who at the NFL?
The comms teams for the Eagles and the Dolphins. And then the people specifically that he named that he said he worked with.
Got it. I don't know necessarily the football stuff.
Okay.
I don't have relationships in the football world.
Sure.
But in the business world, we've definitely, talked to multiple people.
Like Todd and Chris, and they backed him.
Correct.
Wait a second. This means at minimum, Jeff knew about Eddie's background beforehand, or part of it, and still decided to go with it. This is just unbelievable, willful stupidity. And since Jeff is Logan's manager, I assume him and the team should have known about this as well. But still, they went forward with it even though they knew this stuff before launch.
So yeah, a strong argument could probably be made that Jeff, and by extension Logan, because Jeff is Logan's agent after all. He is his manager. He is paid for that particular reason to do certain tasks, to fulfill certain tasks for him, that they had this knowledge about the things that Eddie Ibanez had done that were shady in his past, the lies that he had told, the fact that he didn't have the experience that he said he had, and all of these things were risks to the project and therefore to those third-party investors. They had this information going into it and decided not to act on it. But on top of that, as if that's not enough, there's something else that struck me while watching Logan Paul's response video to CoffeeZilla's series about him. You see, he throws out a number of allegations about a number of people that, just for Logan's sake, I really hope is true. Because it would be terribly ironic if in a video where he's throwing around the word defamation about CoffeeZilla, if in fact in that very video he is actually defaming a number of people. First, he leads with this about CoffeeZilla.
You see, CoffeeZilla tried to work with law enforcement in the past, but his work was described as not anchored to truth and often speculative.
First off, this part feels awkwardly out of place and makes me think that maybe this was just Logan trying to satisfy his ego in the moment, like what he did with all of the memeified photos of CoffeeZilla throughout the video. But more importantly, when did that happen? What law enforcement agency is he talking about? Who said that about him? At best, we've got a hearsay statement about CoffeeZilla that isn't backed up with any receipts, so the viewer is supposed to just blindly accept it. And this is a risky tactic when it's coming from someone who is already starting off with his own credibility issues. But at worst, if it's not true, it's potentially defamatory. Now, I am not saying that it is not true. I have no idea about CoffeeZilla's history, any potential history trying to work with law enforcement or working with law enforcement, but the lack of receipts made me question this. But there is also another point here that should be looked at about the statements that Logan makes about CoffeeZilla in this particular video. And that is Logan's assertion that CoffeeZilla is this criminal who broke the law by recording his manager, Jeff, over the phone.
And surely a real internet detective would not break criminal and civil laws in trying to get information, right? So why have you allowed the illegal recording of Jeff's phone call without his permission? And then more like an internet criminal, post it online.
And it was interesting. It was like, this is wild.
So let's talk about that really quick. So I will start off this point by saying that there is a possibility that Logan has a point here. Some states do in fact require that all parties on a recording have to consent to being recorded in order for that to be a lawful recording. But note that this is where they have a reasonable expectation that they would be speaking in privacy. If someone's just having a conversation out on a public courtyard, there's arguably no reasonable expectation of privacy, and so anyone can arguably be recorded in a circumstance like that. But aside from that, it also depends on where the individuals are located when the alleged recording is happening. Regardless of whether Jeff was in California or Puerto Rico, both of these jurisdictions require that all of the parties to the recording give their consent before that recording being lawful. Of course, Jeff could have been physically in some other state or outside of the country altogether when that happened, in which case the analysis could possibly change. Texas, on the other hand, which is where CoffeeZilla, I believe, lives, is a single-party state, meaning that only one of the parties to the conversation needs to give their consent, so CoffeeZilla would be the one to give the consent. He's the one who's recording after all, and so therefore, from his side, he has a lawful recording. But the thing is that when it comes to courts treating multi-jurisdictional issues like this, usually they are going to go with the most restrictive state. So if Jeff was in California or Puerto Rico and CoffeeZilla was in Texas, the court is going to take whatever state Jeff was in and go with that. But the main question here would be whether or not Jeff had a reasonable expectation of privacy when talking to a journalist who says that he's calling because he's investigating the whole crypto zoo issue, his company, Logan Paul, all of these individuals that were involved. This is arguably a relatively gray area that would involve argument from both sides, but honestly, my gut says probably not. But still, even if CoffeeZilla did in fact violate this law, Logan Paul is also a little bit misleading here about what the penalties are for this. He's highlighted, for example, a $10,000 penalty. But if you actually read the California statute, that is for someone who has already been convicted of that particular crime. Another part of that statute says that the first offense for something like that would be $2,500. Now, of course, that's nothing to sneeze at, but when we're talking about litigation costs, that's really not worth the filing fees. But leading back to Logan throughout the video, calling CoffeeZilla essentially a criminal for recording Jeff over the phone, is that potentially defamatory? Personally, it makes me uncomfortable because of the fact that CoffeeZilla would have an argument against him as to why, in fact, he doesn't violate any of these statutes because of the fact that that conversation doesn't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, or maybe he, in fact, actually did get permission from Jeff and that just wasn't something that showed up in the video. Now, if Logan is wrong about that, is that defamation automatically? Personally, I think that would be a relatively weak case for defamation, but it is still something that Logan is arguably opening himself up to by perpetuating those allegations against CoffeeZilla and doing so very robustly. Now, that's CoffeeZilla. Logan makes a number of allegations that he just sort of splashes out there about a number of other people as well. First, I'll mention Emilio. Here's what Logan says about him.
And surely you knew Emilio, the gentleman who supposedly let his child invest in a cryptocurrency, was allegedly responsible for 2 rug pulls before you interviewed him. So either you missed that or you knew it and failed to let the public know. Why? Because it was a clear sign that he was also untrustworthy.
First off, objection relevance. What does that have to do with Emilio getting scammed potentially by CryptoZoo and all of the guys that were involved in it? But second, how do we know that that's actually true? How do we know that this Emilio, who has a relatively common first name, to be fair, especially in certain parts of the world, is actually the same guy who performed this rug pull with 2 other coins in the past? If that's not true, potentially defamatory, of course, with the proper analysis of requisite intent and all that kind of stuff. But that's something that Logan really should be relatively careful of. I don't know. Maybe he did his own analysis. Maybe he has all kinds of background information before saying these things. But the way in which it's been just sort of thrown out there without real receipts, without any sort of foundation, really dials up my anxiety a little bit on the things that he's saying here. But finally, Logan also throws out a major accusation against the lead developer of CryptoZoo. Specifically, this is what he says.
Coffee, you interviewed the developer who stole the game code, fled to Switzerland, and held it hostage for $1 million. Well, his name is Zach Kelling. Surely, as the internet detective that you proclaim to be, you would know that he spent time in prison for multiple felonies, one for aggravated robbery, armed robbery at a liquor store, and the other for, surprise, obstructing the legal process. I can see why you kept him anonymous.
Who we'll be calling Z here.
I guess among many things, it doesn't surprise me that he lied about having 30 engineers and a $50,000 a week burn rate.
On my end, I have 30 engineers. I'm burning $50,000 a week.
Which, side note, is how this delusionist landed on the $1 million code ransom, but it turns out he only had 3 engineers. Wouldn't someone with journalistic integrity know their credible source had not only an agenda, but a fondness for orange jumpsuits? Or did you just hear what you wanted to hear and moved on? Because even if you're lying to yourself, Stephen, you still have to believe it.
Again, objection relevance. Also, if this were a court of law, this would not be admissible to try to discredit this developer anyway, because of the fact that the prior crimes are not crimes of dishonesty. But at the same time, how do we know that this Zach Kelling, who is a felon, is the same Zach Kelling as the lead developer for CryptoZoo? There are 2 things specifically that give me pause here. First, the image that he puts on the screen looks like a basic background search result, but we can't see any way of corroborating whether or not this guy is the same guy as that guy. And so it's relatively unclear to the viewer whether or not that corroboration was done at all. And at the same time, it does look like there is a potential discrepancy in the middle name of this individual, showing that there is not a match between this person and the person that they are searching for information on. It could just be that they didn't have his middle name, I suppose, but still, when you're looking at this as a viewer that is just taking in this information, that's a possible discrepancy. That is a possible warning sign. Now, one thing that Logan Paul does do is he shows a picture of Zach Kelling today and then a picture of him when he was younger. And it does look like it's the same guy. But then Logan Paul also shows a photo of the younger version of Zach Kelling in an orange jumpsuit. And that does seem to confirm, oh, hey, that looks like the same guy. It looks like the same guy is also in a jumpsuit at some point. This guy's definitely a felon. However, you only need to look at it for a little bit of time to realize that that photo of the younger Zach Kelling in a jumpsuit is actually the same photo of the younger Zach Kelling in a normal sort of outfit. And that orange jumpsuit has actually been photoshopped onto him. I'm sorry, but to me personally, this felt very sneaky and manipulative, and it does ring a bell as to the accuracy of this information. And the thing is, if it does in fact turn out that Logan Paul is wrong on this one, this is highly defamatory. We're talking about defamation per se, where Zach wouldn't even need to prove damages. And what's more, because Zach is not a public figure, and because his participation in the series was as anonymously as possible, he requested anonymity, and so CoffeeZilla gave him the name Z instead of using his full name. He didn't physically appear with his face, or his voice was also distorted. All of these things indicate that he is not a public figure, he is a private figure, and so the analysis would be different than it is for Logan Paul. In other words, Zach would not have to show actual malice. All he would need to show is that Logan Paul was negligent in using his photo, using this information, and by making a misstatement about a potential criminal background of Zach Kelling. And the damages for this could be very, very high, not only because of the nature of the lies, but also because it was said by Logan Paul, which already is something that garners its own sort of exposure. But it's being said by Logan Paul in the midst of a controversy that is also generating a lot of internet attention. So all Zach would need to do is show that Logan lied about him and did so negligently. That is a much lower standard than actual malice. So, like I said, for Logan's sake, I really do hope that he was right about the lead developer being a felon, because otherwise...
You blew it.
So yeah, okay, there could be a number of reasons for Logan's sudden about face. It could just be because he saw that the public backlash was overwhelmingly against him on this issue, and maybe realized that people saw him as like the Biff to CoffeeZilla's Marty McFly.
All right, punk. Now, whoa, Biff. What's that?
It's like a little gnat. It's like a little fucking annoying gnat. It bothers me.
Or it could be that he had legal counsel giving him some very strong words about some of the repercussions of what he did in the last two videos. Or maybe both. Something tells me it was probably both. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. Special thanks to to the members of Byte Club, folks that are supporting us through YouTube memberships, supporters on Locals, and supporters on Patreon. We often cover a lot of different topics on this channel that YouTube does not particularly like to monetize, so support from you guys is always so helpful. And thank you to everyone else for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more content like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded. See you in the next video. So what happens when the judge doesn't believe your overall theory of the case? This is something that Courtney Clenny, also known as Courtney Taylor, also known as the defendant in the OnlyFans murder case, has to contend with. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legal Bites. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we make sense of the law one bite at a time. So, quick little tidbit, you may be noticing that this video is not coming from my normal studio. This is coming from my California studio, also known as my parents' house. Obviously, like a lot of people, I decided to travel to see some family for Christmas, and so here we are. It's complete even with the homemade art that I made for my mom, which of course promptly made it directly into my room. Thanks, Mom. So anyway, back to the OnlyFans murder case. So the opinion of the judge on this particular issue came about in a recent hearing in the OnlyFans murder case. If you don't know, Courtney Clenny is on trial for murdering her boyfriend, Christian Obumzeli, back on April 3rd, 2022. The state thinks that she murdered him. She claims self-defense. The trial was originally set to begin on December 19th, 2022, but recently, in this last hearing, the court decided to push back the trial to the earliest March 2023. We were looking forward to live streaming it on this channel from gavel to gavel because most likely there should be cameras in the courtroom for this one, but you know, as disappointing as it is, it looks like we will hopefully have that chance later on in 2023. So, disappointing, sure, but not the end of the world. But anyway, in this same hearing, the court actually made another really important decision, which was denying Courtney Clenny's bond. So as a result, she'll be staying in prison until trial, unless the court decides to change her mind at some point. Now, the reasons why Courtney Clenny would want to not be in prison are plentiful. For one thing, prison is a weird place. Weirder than a lot of people might think even, possibly. I don't know. I just remember that when I first attended a deposition at a prison, I got plenty of an education as to just how strange that place can be. And, you know, understandably, it's not exactly the most comfortable place, and it can be very stressful. And based on how she's been appearing in the courtroom in the last several hearings ever since she was arrested, it looks like she's been kind of wearing that stress on her body. Now, I don't want to get into any level of body shaming here, but we do have to confront realities when it comes to someone's presentation in the courtroom. And we often talk on this channel about how realistically, when you're presenting a case to a jury, you're presenting it to a bunch of human beings who are likely to make all kinds of judgments on their own, whether those are popular or not. And in this case, we have somebody who has made millions of dollars through being a model of sorts on Instagram and on OnlyFans. And so there is a certain level of expectation that might come from that presentation of her background, as well as the context of her relationship with the alleged victim, Christian Obumzeli. And it is uncomfortable to point this out, but it's true that it has been noticeable that she has been gaining weight and her appearance has been overall changing since she's been in prison. This honestly probably is because of the overall stress of her situation. She might be the kind of person that has a tendency to stress eat. I know, I've been there. I don't know about you, but I have. But on another level, this could also be her being in some form of withdrawals from drugs and alcohol. After all, when she was arrested in Hawaii, she was arrested from a rehab facility, and it has come out at various hearings that she and Christian Obumzeli used to engage in drugs and alcohol. And based on the audios that we have heard that have come out in this case, she does seem to be somebody who has imbibed quite a bit and over-imbibed on a regular basis. In other words, she may have been dealing with some addiction issues. Now, I'm not going to go into any sort of details in this particular video as to the specifics of those substances that she may or may not have used, but let's just say that they were probably a lot of stimulants, so that may have impacted her overall metabolism when she was actually using them. So in the coming down, after the removal of those substances from her life, she may have impacted her metabolism in the opposite direction. Now, when I mention all of that, I'm not saying that to advocate in any way for any of these things. Quite the opposite. Clearly, there are all kinds of reasons why not to use these things. They are incredibly unhealthy and also illegal. I'm simply pointing this out as a potential reason for why she might have a certain fluctuation in her weight. So with all of that in mind, it could very well be that Miss Clenny would like to be able to be out of prison so that she can, I don't know, go to a gym more regularly, or a fancier gym, or, something along those lines, so that she can show up to court when trial actually does come around and be more of her older self, younger self, former self before being arrested. But unfortunately for Miss Clenny, she's going to have to hang around in prison until at least her trial date, or maybe the rest of her life if she's convicted, of course. And again, this is obviously assuming that the judge doesn't change her mind at some point between now and the trial date. But anyway, why did the judge decide not to let Miss Clenny out on bail in the first place? Well, there are two basic reasons. The first is that if she was sent out on bail, she would be sent to live in Texas with her parents. And the judge said that she just was not comfortable with sending her all the way to another state. This would increase the risk of her being a flight risk, and this was something that prosecutors really hammered in when they were arguing against Courtney Clenny being let out on bail. They said that between the distance between Florida and Texas and the overall amount that Courtney Clenny has been able to make through her work online, we're talking literally millions of dollars in the span of 2 years. All of that sort of comes together to make her a potential flight risk because of the distance and the resources and all of that put together. But the second reason why the judge did not let her out on bail was a little bit more interesting. This is where she said that she really didn't believe that Courtney Clenny was actually acting in self-defense. The reason why this conclusion is important for the bond question is because